Cancelled again? I'm here with Stuart Bonds because, like everyone else, we've been following what seems to be the story of the week. Whether it's left, right, up, down, top, or bottom, this is the most judicially divisive issue I've seen already. Stuart, thank you for joining me. Hope you're looking forward to this. What are your thoughts before we get to some of the background?
Well, it's like the Twilight Saga, isn't it? It just like the Harry Potter movies. It just does not end. I find it so comical that we got all this going on. Like I went into Woolworths today. There's no food on the shelves, right? We've got rampant inflation. We've got all these serious issues, and here we are wrapped up in Novak Djokovic. But I do think that sometimes people become like a symbol, right? And this guy is a symbol of everything that's gone wrong with our system. And he's the government that they just must squash this fly by any means necessary, So, and here he is again, yes, back in court.
Yet again, we're back in court. Now, there is a directions hearing that's true to be happening quite soon, which we'll tune over to in just a bit. But Alex Hawke, the immigration minister, a Liberal Party MB, was given the job, took the job, or loved doing the job, we're not sure which, of cancelling the visa under, well, what are the grounds?
Well, as far as I can understand it.
Alex, so they were under good character grounds, was what Alex Hawke seemed to have said about it. We've got a direction here, but with cancel.
I don't know how they define good character grounds. Like, I know, like he's not a terrorist. He's a number one tennis player in the world. He's one of the best players to ever play the sport. He donated $25,000 to our bushfire appeal. What sort of bad character is this?
That is one of the judgments that people are trying to make sense of. I'll just bring the full minister, if I can, and the full release. Today, I exercised my power under Section 133(c)(3) of the Migration Act to cancel the visa held by Mr. Novak Djokovic on the health and good order grounds on the basis that it was in the public interest to do so. This decision followed orders by the Federal Court and Family Court. I carefully considered the information provided to me by the department, firmly committed to blah, 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 blah. First paragraph is all that matters. Health and good order grounds. What do you think?
But I just think that's just a gutless, he did several things wrong. Why not just call it out? And why not just say, this is what happens when you lie on documents to the federal government, right? Why on, it's just absurd. Like, he did lie. He did lie on these documents. He said that he hadn't been anywhere in 14 days. He'd actually been in Spain. So he was he'd lied about that. So that screwed him, and he was probably meant to be isolating when he had some of these pictures taken, right? I think that's his card sin. But I think his real sin here in Australia is he went up against the government, right? And the government lost. It sort of reminds me of that, that scene from the movie Ants, Chris, where you've got Hopper, the grasshopper, and he's in the bar with the guys, and he throws a nut at the guy's head and says, "Does that one hurt?" And he said, "No." And he threw another one and said, "Does that one hurt?" He said, "No." And then he knocked the whole lid off the whole jar, and it killed the grasshoppers. And he said, you can't let that one ant stand up, right? Because then you'll have an army of ants, and there's lots of them, and there's not many of us. And that's exactly what this case is to me, in my eyes. This is the grasshoppers squashing the ants.
And what we're trying to work out with some of this is what you mentioned there, that he did lie on the form. And the key part of that was that he was in Belgrade on the 17th of December, but then he was pictured within the 14-day period that he filled a form out on in Spain. And that is what you and a few others believe is the main grounds for it. And it is quite likely that he filled out his immigration form that said he had not traveled to another country in the previous 14 days.
But what's most likely
one of the points,
he's never filled the form out, right? He's worth $100 million. He doesn't fill out forms, right? He flew here in a private jet, so someone's filled this out for him, and it could be an honest mistake.
Yes, it could be an honest mistake, but mistakes, as they'll often be reminded, have consequences, whatever the country might be. I guess in this circumstance, with the not just the publicity, but also the question around it is if he were not supporting the causes that he is or believed to be, particularly his vaccination status, would Rafael Nadal be facing a problem because he traveled to another European country at the same time? And that's the confusion around this. And I wanted to go through some other visa cancellations with you because I'm trying to find other visa cancellations. And we know, and your first few Google results and what comes to mind are your Miley Yiannopoulos, your Lauren Southerns, your and the like. Raheem Kassam, do you remember with CPAC and things like that? Is there what other cancellations can you think of here?
Yeah, no, I do recall Katie Hopkins from the UK. That was she made it about doing something in hotel quarantine, and therefore they cancelled the show that she was on, and therefore I think that the show was the only reason she had a visa, so they were able to get rid of her visa as well. So, there seems to be a bit of a theme here. I don't know too many left-wing nutcases that come over that get banned. It just seems to be leaning heavy right. But I am quite surprised that the state Labor government gave in, and it was actually the federal government that stepped in, the federal Liberal government. And I think that Djokovic has been used as political pawn with this election coming up, personally.
I think that directions hearing. Yes, that directions hearing is on. I'm going to cut over to that. Let us know if through to your feed, Stuart, are you able to hear the feed as well?
It's very quiet.
For me too.
I'm grateful for that indication.
Now, these things are notorious hard to follow because they're a bit of a circus, because they talk about things and they use legal mumbo jumbo that
on an assumption
you and I
that the transfer order is made, and I can do that of my own initiative, as I have indicated, that order would become operative upon it being confirmed pursuant to section 32 AD of the Federal Circuit Court of Australia, Federal Court of Australia Act, I beg your pardon. It is not for this court, as I've emphasised, to purport to direct in any way, shape or form how the business of the Federal Court of Australia should be conducted. But if one tries to think about this in a practical, efficient way that is consistent with the parties and obligations, their overarching obligations to themselves, each other and this court, it is difficult to imagine that any judge to whom a proceeding is transferred that is of this kind would not themselves immediately turn their mind to what orders they contend to be appropriate for the determination of the proceeding by them in their docket. So I'm certainly content
That's not
to make orders which are driven to the aspiration that you've expressed of 10-15, and I'm sure that would be consistent with some of the matters that have been dealt with under the heading sensitivity in the submission. But
Your Honour, would Your Honour hear me on the anterior question of whether Your Honour ought to, I understand that Your Honour has the power. Can I make a brief submission directed to the question of whether Your Honour ought, in the exercise of discretion, transfer the matter to the Federal Court?
Of course you may.
Very briefly, Your Honour, the only concern we have with that.
I'm going to pull that back, and we'll come back to that in a bit if we can, because that's more of a procedural matter as to which court it's going to be hearing of at the moment. We'll come back to Katie Hopkins for a bit, which was probably the most similar situation, where we were looking at that she broadcast, and this is broadly accurate despite criticism of the guy, that it is accurate that she did broadcast a live video where she did make a humorous joke that she was trying to frighten the security guards by answering her hotel door maskless. I remember looking at this video before it got pulled. That led to a visa cancellation in that example as well. Do you think this is comparable, Stu?
Look, Katie Hopkins is a much hated political commentator. I think she's quite a thought-provoking person. I mean, like, personally, she's quite crass. I mean, I don't like her commentary all the time, but I mean, I heard some good stuff come out of her mouth the other day when this nonsense is going on overseas with the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and number 10 Downing Street, where they've been having these continuous parties going on whilst everybody is in lockdown, right? And she brought up and made a great point that we shouldn't be asking who was at these parties. We should be asking why the people with the most data and the most evidence and the most science, why those people thought it was perfectly fine to have a party and to be able to drink openly. And if we did it, the layman out in the public, it was certain death, right? There is mixed messages. Why were those messages? And that's things like that are very thought provoking, you know. So, but people don't like Katie because they don't want her to point this crap out, you know, the hypocrisy of it. And I mean, are we going to stop trading with the UK because the UK Prime Minister can't follow the rules, right? Like, how far do you go with it?
We'll have a quick look at Novak's commentary here, which was that he was concerned about some misinformation there, which was when he said he was positive that he attended a basketball game on the 14th, reported that he had no symptoms. He took a rapid antigen on the 16th and then got a PCR on the 16th as well. And then he says that when he went to the 18th, he did a photo shoot, but then didn't want to let the journalists down by going there. So he also went to an event while plausibly COVID positive, because the next day, the 17th, he took a test and it was negative, but he got a positive PCR test at the end of the 17th, it seems, after he went to that event, but he still went to an event on the 18th. So look, going to an event while you're still COVID positive because you didn't want to let journalists down, it's not a good look. I mean, no matter how you look at it.
No, it's not a good look, but does that disqualify him from playing tennis? I mean, does the UK's Prime Minister having parties in his backyard whilst he's locking the whole country down, does that disqualify him from, being someone that we should do trade negotiations with? What about Dan Andrews? Dan Andrews got fined himself for walking right next to his sidekick, and he ended up getting 2 separate fines, right? Because he can't follow his own rules, right? Where, it's not in good taste. I'm not suggesting anyone should go out while they're COVID positive and do anything, but I'm just saying those in glass houses should not throw stones.
Walking from a car to a podium is a world of difference to going to an indoor event with children. This is one of the criticisms that will be out there, is this is spreading by people going to indoor events and what have you rather than outdoor events. And that's the big differentiator that we're still struggling to get up to date with. It's not, let's all lock at home. We're trying to transition now to living with virus and being careful of indoors and what have you. But we're trying to find from small breaches of the code to big breaches of the code to try and stop this virus spreading. At the end of it, we get to a point of, well, we're trying to stop a virus from spreading inside a state here, at least New South Wales, where we're seeing 90,000 cases a day. So all of the details of, are you wearing a mask beneath your nose? Are you walking from car to podium? Are you going to events knowingly COVID positive? There's degrees as we go from bottom to top, but I say going to events knowingly positive, unless without telling everyone there, bit of a big deal. But then you get to the question of, do these rules even matter when we're at, call it 100,000. What's the difference between 90 and 100,000? Call it 100,000 cases a day. Call it huge percentage points of the city positive a day. Do any of these rules matter now? Are we just post all of that?
Well, no, I think they do have some relevance, because this is not over, right? By any stretch of the imagination, that this pandemic narrative cannot be allowed to die. Even if we get another 3 or 4 years of Omicron-like viruses, right, that are going to come one after the other, the governments of the world have made their beds, and they're going to lay in it until they start to lose elections and the public sentiment changes, right? Because this is the narrative they've done. They've instilled this fear in everybody's heart, and now everybody's shitting themselves, right? Rightfully, when you're just seeing death and destruction on the news, and there's, you can't now just throw your hands up and say, it's all good. It's all, don't worry about the vaccines anymore. We know that they're not stopping the spread, and, they don't appear to be as effective as we thought. So don't worry about it. You can't do that.
So are you saying along the lines that the government's trapped in an ideological rut, that it's still fighting a war against Alpha or Delta when we're in a 100,000 per day Omicron world? We're no longer concerned about Delta's 500 cases a day or Alpha's 100 cases a day, that we're using the same rules that were from 2 years ago, and that's got to change. But it can't because of
they're gone, mate. And I think that the protests on the streets, I think that having hundreds of thousands of people on the street week after week after week has had a massive impact on the politicians' way of thinking. You can't go into an election, be it Scott Morrison or Dan Andrews in November, and then again Dominic Perrottet, New South Wales early next year, go into elections with hundreds of thousands of people marching on the streets. So they're trying to open up without freaking everybody out as well, So they've created they're back in the corner.
There are plenty of rules that don't make sense, and I disagree with. And there's increasingly, as the world changes, governments have a hard time keeping up with that. From printing press and technology and from when cars came in. For a number of years here in New South Wales, we had rules that you needed to walk in front of your car with a red flag because of horses. And we only got rid of that in early part of the millennium. But no one had walked in front of their car with a flag for a very, very long time. These rules are still there, and no one may follow them, and they might not be there. And Omicron has only kind of changed the game in a couple of weeks, but they're still there. You've still got to follow those rules. And Novak still, even though he delegated it to his manager, filled the form out wrong. Knowingly or not, we can't really get to that depth, but if you fill a form out wrong, an important one like borders, immigration, doesn't that still have a consequence?
Yeah, and that's fine. And normal times, you got to ask yourself, if this happened, say 2018, right? What would have happened? Nothing. No one would have heard about it. You wouldn't have known about it. No one would have known. And even if there was someone in immigration picked up on it, which they didn't, someone in social media land picked up on it, right? It was someone hacking through his Facebook picked up on it. If that had happened then, it would have just been some sort of maybe a $200 penalty or something, and don't do this again. If that, right? So now fast forward to now, they wanted to kick him out of the country because he was not vaccinated, right? Now they've got him technicality, right? They were going to get this guy hell or high water. They were headhunting him, Chris. He was a done man. Didn't matter how they did it.
So Nadal or others which end up testing positive, as so many people are, so this isn't just Rafael Nadal, this is lots of people down there who end up testing positive in or around or close to the Australian Open, not just permitted into the country, but allowed to play. And the concern you have there is this isn't about the virus, this is about vaccination status and political views and ideas. Is that right?
100%. It was, they said that they were not going to let him in unvaccinated, right? And the Victorian government caved because they realised they'd written rules around, and they didn't know, and obviously he didn't even know at the time, that he was going to contract COVID in late December. You remember we were talking about this in October, November. This has been going on for a while, and then he ended up getting sick, right? So whether he's really sick or not, I don't know. He said he's got a positive PCR, so he'd have to have some sort of documentation, and he would have submitted that to the Victorian government. And I think the federal government's tried to play politics and gone, well, you've caved, but we won't cave, right? And it's just blown up in their face, you know? So this is out of spite. That's what this is, spite.
On that ideology around vaccination is the concern there that if Djokovic had made these mistakes but was vaccinated, we wouldn't be having this debate.
No, I guarantee we wouldn't be. Guaranteed, no way. They were out to get him. If Nadal had made this mistake, would be no problem. Now, I'm not saying he should be allowed to lie on his forms, and I'm not saying there should be absolutely no consequences for it. But what I'm saying is that throwing him out of the country because he's 1 or 2 days out on his form that he may not have even filled out. You know, come on.
Attending an event while positive. Anyone who gets that text message saying that they've got a positive result, right? Anyone who gets that text message, America, Europe, I don't know a country that takes a positive PCR test in a mild way. He went to an event the next day. That's putting the vaccine aside.
He's a dick for doing that, Chris. He's a dick. He's an asshole. He should have never went there. But that wasn't in our country, right? That wasn't in our country. And if we're going to start talking about standards of human beings that are in Parliament, right, there's some shady characters down there, right? And they're representing the country in Parliament. You know, this guy just wants to come and play tennis and go home.
And so doesn't that come to character? That your character and how you judge and handle yourself in another country does matter, does have an effect. That if he's someone who attends events knowingly COVID positive, without telling everyone, that knowingly COVID indoor events, I think that's an important one to clarify. This was an indoor event. This wasn't playing tennis outside. An indoor event, which was for a photo shoot with other people. Doesn't that show that being a dick, as you say, is of poor character, and he might do that again? A thief is a thief. A murderer is a murderer. A person who ignores a positive test is a positive testerizer.
Yeah, but this is what I'm saying. Is somebody who writes rules to lock people inside their own houses, are they fit, and then host parties in his outside garden, are they fit to do negotiations with us and hold keys to nuclear weapons, right? You know, you're trying to, what have you got to compare this to? Like, this is look like it's a cardinal sin, and realistically, this is a flu. It has turned into a flu, right? This guy's positive, and he's about to go and play tennis like 3 weeks after he's gone positive, right? This is like, how many times have you gone to work sick? I've gone to work with the flu before. Like, I've gone to work crook. You know, yeah, it's a cardinal sin because it's a COVID sin. You're not allowed to commit these things. You're not allowed to get around unvaccinated, and you must listen to the government. And I'm, like I said, I'm not saying go and do stuff when you're positive, but he didn't do it in our country, all right? I don't even think he's been prosecuted for doing what he did.
If I can make a comment, that the Serbian PM did make a comment and did, I wouldn't use the word condemn, but did criticize him if he knowingly went out positive. So there's even his own, which was even a few days ago, the president, not the PM, of Serbia was suggesting some kind of diplomatic or trade retaliation if this went the way that it may go. For everyone trying to keep an eye on the federal court hearings, I am keeping an eye on the stream, but it is very patchy and dropping frames all over the place because we, like thousands of others, are trying to watch this, and it's not going well. This happened the last time it happened, and this time thousands of other people are on teams.
Yeah, I think that because this is, like I was saying, Chris, this has become, in my opinion, like a ceremonial battle, right? Of this good and evil, if you want to put it that way, or freedom-loving people and people who believe COVID's the end of the earth, right? I mean, like I've got mates of mine who I never would have thought would have been too concerned about this stuff, are fully freaked out about it, right? And they're like, well, you know, even openly said to me, well, if you're not willing to go and get vaccinated, then basically, I'm not too concerned if you get sick and die, is basically the note that come out of that conversation. And it's surprising to me because I thought that these people were freedom-loving individuals. They can't see the slippery slope that I think that we're on. And it's quite concerning to me. And so I think that this is a symbolic court battle. The Serbian people seem to recognise it. We can't.
So then we come to a fair point which is that the concern of why financial support was needed through COVID was that many low-income workers from Western Sydney were going to work knowingly COVID positive because what can you do? You got to go work, and that needed to come in to stop them going for work COVID positive. Djokovic is not a poorly paid worker. At the same time, this is his main business, which is going to Australian Opens, but nor is photo shoots. Really what we're looking for here, as much from the poorly paid Western Sydney worker that we handed out money to, as much as Djokovic, who has way too much money we don't need to hand out money to, is honesty. We needed to help the Western Sydney worker so he could be honest, despite his own financial obligations. In Djokovic's case, what's the excuse? Like what's the excuse that he goes to events COVID positive? He's made a mistake on his forms despite being able to afford the best. You know, his situation takes all of the money out of this equation. What is the excuse for his actions beyond because he could, kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I don't know. Like I said, I think he's a dick for doing what he did, and he lied on his form. And if they were the original sins that they were going to prosecute him under, right, then that would be fine. But I look at the fact that they tried to kick him out initially because of he wasn't vaccinated. And like I was saying, if this guy was vaccinated, would he be in the same situation as what we are now, right? If there was a person that's kicking around this country that went out to a venue when they were COVID positive, should they now be deported from the country? Is that the standard that we've set? Because to me, this sounds like a precedent to me. If you're in this country, you've gone COVID positive, and you've gone out to a venue, then you are deported. A crime that is left for bikies, it's very hard to get kicked out of this country. It's drugs, it's bikie crime, it's gun crime, gun violence. You know, it's stuff that you go to jail for, serious violent crime, and then you get your visa cancelled. It's not going COVID positive in another country, you know, but then that comes down to the very broad law that they've written around good character. Who defines what good character is? The person that holds power at the time. And that's why you need to make sure that you write laws, they're very specific so that they can't be misinterpreted, you know, or reinterpreted, you know, Stalin style.
Well, whether it's Stalin or Hitler, whoever's in charge at the time will get it. And those extremes is what tends to upset a majority. The crimes that you brought up there, firearms, knives, violent, you know, crimes of violence, as opposed to racking up too many speeding fines, they tend to inflict harm on people who didn't want to be involved in them. A parking fine is not something that I believe people get deported for, but shootings, firearms offences, these are things that people get visas cancelled for. Spreading a virus. We might not be in an alpha delta situation now that we're in a micron and you have 100,000 people in our city spreading the virus every day and on the order of 500,000 active cases. Let's not talk about how absurd those numbers are these days, just huge. Even if there are 500,000 people in the city shooting off these invisible viruses in that same way, shouldn't we be trying to hold Novak to this standard that just as we're going to we are fining people for not declaring their rat tests and not, you know, sending in positive tests to authorities, shouldn't we show a penalty to someone who isn't showing the same level of responsibility and character? And isn't this the new normal, that we penalize people who do the wrong thing in this way? Aren't we just trying to look for consequences here?
I know, because I can't get out of my head the fact that they were trying to get rid of the guy anyway. You know what I mean? Like I just can't get over the fact that they were already gunning for him. They were already looking for him. You know, it's like if I try to hit you with my car and I miss you, and then I hit you a second time, and then go, well, you know, it was an accident. Well, clearly wasn't an accident. I didn't just come across you. I was looking for you. I'd already missed you once. You know, they looking to make an example of this guy. I'm not trying to condone what he did. Right? He's an arsehole for doing what he did. But let that country condemn him for what he's done. You know, even Katie Hopkins, like, they cancelled her visa at the drop of a hat for answering the door without a mask. Didn't say anything about how close she was to the guy. She didn't cough on the guy, I don't think. You know.
I didn't see that in the video, and I did watch the video. I'm sure there's a copy of it somewhere around, but it was seemed to be prankful. I didn't actually see it directly out the door. I think it was a food delivery, but this is where we get back to it's about optics. Just as Katie Hopkins was making fun of the rules, if I can flip the script around on you, is Hawke winning? Like the immigration minister coming back to this timeline, if we can, looking back at it, having already faced a potential, detainment and a court hearing that said, what more can this guy do? Let's say he did break the rules. Well, not let's just say, clearly there's probably some rule that's been broken along the way, no doubt along the way here. But is this going to send, like most crimes that you want to prosecute for, a signal to all the other people, don't do this? When someone stabs someone, generally what you're trying to do is hold them to account and hold them up and say, see this guy that stabbed this guy? We're going to hold him to account. It's now because of the fame and the complexity of this matter that I even need such a diagram to try and explain the complexity of it. I'm not sure what the lesson is.
We don't get to write the narrative on this anymore, Chris. We don't get to tell the story anymore because it has got complex, right? It's not until you actually sit down and spend some time looking into these stories that you find out what it's all about. Like it took me a few hours of reading the other day to find out what was going on with Boris Johnson and why they were all so pissed with him over there, right? Because he was hosting these parties. But it was a complex story as well because technically he hadn't done the wrong thing because he was inside his own residence, but he had like 100 people there, right? So, yes, and he was, there's all these things about going out and drinking in parties and he was hosting a party. But that's what I mean. It ends up being the story is not written by us. The story is written by external media organisations that are going to tell a story. Here we look like we've locked up, which we did, the world's best tennis player, let him out because the court said, what more could the man have done? And then we pursued him and kicked him out of the country, right? That's the story. Now, the nuance in there don't matter because that's how everyone's going to see it.
Is this just divided into groups of people of how seriously you take the virus then? Because as much as earlier on in terms of visa cancels, we both know that, and we're both saying that most visa cancels that quickly show up in quick search results, and both of our memories tend to be a kind of right-wing ethno-nacho cancellations, Stefan Molyneux, Lauren Southern, etc., etc. Is this kind of a right-wing anti-vax angle, or is this just is this on the other side simply a tough on borders approach to anyone that criticizes government policy, or is this on the third side just trying to, and this is a broad majority of people concerned about the virus and anyone who breaches them because of his profile just needs to be made an example of?
I think it's the latter, right? I think it is that he is such a high-profile person, and he has put egg on the government's face, right? But you have to remember, the rest of the world is 12 or 18 months in front of where we are because they went through all this stuff. And remember, we were looking at these countries in late 2020 and 21, and we were going, what the hell is going on over there, right? Like, we were all right here in Australia. And so they've moved past this. They've gone through all this, and now they're opening up, right? So they're watching us shoot our protesters with pepper balls, spraying with capsicum spray. There's violence in the streets. There's CFMEU officers getting smashed up, right? There's no other chaos going on in the world around this except this country, right? Now, there has been some rather large protests lately, but we have made the headlines for the most dictatorial country in the world at the moment around COVID. And then we literally detain the world's best tennis player. What the hell did they think was going to happen?
Regardless of the truth and details behind it, yeah, it's something I agree that it simply looks terrible. Globally, the headlines have been, it's hard to go around the world and find some headlines that say, oh yes, well done Australia for doing what you've done. Only the group of people within Australia that support vaccine mandates broadly encourage this. And the trouble is that group that support vaccine mandates is roughly split in two with more open border types. So it's another moral quandary for the vaccine mandate group. Is it then becomes hard because how do you take Novak being in the same hotel as refugees? The cause was seen to be quite similar by much of this group. And this is something I'll turn around to you as well, Stu, is why would Novak be fair to be released from that hotel which houses refugees, but on the other side, those same refugees being kept there still need to be kept in there? Isn't this the same story?
Well, I'm not necessarily sure of the circumstances that these people have been put into detention. So I can't comment on all their cases, but I have heard that some of them have been in there for years and years and years, right, in this hotel. Right? I don't know how true that is. I don't know if they're allowed out. I don't know if that just has to be their residence, so they're under like some sort of day arrest or something. I don't know. But they are detained the same as he's detained, yes. And they are in the same hotel. Apparently, they're eating the same food, right? Unfortunately, this has not gone down well, right? This has damaged Scott Morrison's image with the left side of politics, right? It's damaged it with the right side of politics, and it's internationally given us a black eye. Like, I do not know what Scott Morrison hoped to gain out of doing what they did when the Victorian government caved on it, right? The moment the Victorian government caved, that was a win for Scott Morrison, because you could have just said, well, the Victorian government have allowed this bloke to play in their state, right? Simple as that. And he didn't. And he's an idiot. And he's probably going to lose the election. And this will be a small percentage of the reason why, because he's incompetent, right? I'm not saying I'll be better, but ScoMo sure hasn't done himself any favours.
And that's most elections tend to be voting not for the other person. As much as some groups of voters, the most ardent supporters, vote for their person, there's a whole other much bigger group which is voting for not them, whatever that might be. Not Labor, not Liberal, not Greens, not Pauline, not Shooters, not Biden, not Trump. And that's the much bigger group that is underserved. We spend so much time. I'll fork on a comment if I can. We spend so much time and attention focusing on Labor and Liberal supporters. We spend so much time and attention focusing on Republicans, Democrats, when the largest voting group that most political parties just don't seem to be paying attention to, or not enough of, is, again, the people voting for not them. There's a whole group of people that don't want to vote for ScoMo, and Craig Kelly's lapping them up, and Pauline's trying to catch what they can as well. And there's a whole group that don't want to vote for Albo or, up your way, Joel Fitzgibbon. And inner city Greens parties are winning lower house seats in federal, and they're winning upper house federal seats and state seats, and they're winning all of the inner cities with policies that appeal to them that Labor just can't go that far on, and it's stretching the two. So between your One Nation and Greens, that's where you got your two, and the not that guy vote is huge. But coming back to, if I can, Sean Davis's fair comment here, which was, there you go. He's not of good character under the immigration laws. Immigration misdemeanors a person has done things overseas which crimes or other matters deemed not of character and can be deported. So maybe going to that event, not a good character. Thumbs down, get out. Don't go to events while knowingly COVID positive, right?
Yeah, but I mean, has he been prosecuted for it? I think he admitted it, right? So if he's admitted doing it, then that's as good as, as good as a crime, I guess. I don't know. I think the Americans have been got drink driving charges within a certain period of time and all that sort of thing. So I mean, there is precedent for all this. What I'm getting back to is that this never would have been noticed, and it sort of shows you how many holes are in our security system as well. Is that here's this guy, massive profile, and they've headhunted him on vaccines when they really didn't need to do it because he'd been in another country, and they didn't even identify it. It was someone on Facebook that picked it up. Someone was like, hang on, these days don't line up. So how would you cross border security when people on Facebook are picking up this stuff?
Yeah. Let's see if I'm going to come back over to the directions and hearing and see if we can hear any of that, and give us 1 second.
And I just wonder whether this is effectively an important foundational aspect of this case.
Well, can I say in respect of that, I mean, obviously, as Your Honour will know, I wasn't in the matter on Monday, but that matter was a cancellation, which, as Your Honour knows, was set aside. That decision is over. In fact, that entire matter is over. This is an entirely fresh application and a new.
I have said that.
And the Minister has, I would agree with Mr. Wood, at least to this extent, that the Minister has his own reasons for his decision. And Your Honour will be asked to consider the validity of those reasons, and they won't turn on the same issues as the earlier case because they are posed differently, and they're not, the same issues don't arise.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Wood, anything further?
Only just two brief points, Your Honour. So for on that Atagi point, to explain how it doesn't arise here, Your Honour, if you take paragraph 15 of the Minister's reasons, consistent with what I was saying earlier about the Minister's radical new approach, where all the issues that mattered to Monday's hearing no longer matter. So at 15, dealing with Atagi, the Minister says, I will assume that Mr. Djokovic entered Australia consistently with Atagi documents. I'm aware there was a dispute about this in the Federal Circuit Court in relation to the delegate's decision. For present purposes, I'll assume that Mr. Djokovic's position is correct, rather than seek to get to the bottom of this here. So in other words, in substance, the Minister says consistently with a broader approach, assume that Mr. Djokovic did tick every box, that he was exempt, that he poses no risk of infection himself to others, and so forth and so on. That there was no problem with declarations of the like. The underlying new rationale is not a direct risk to others. It's that Mr. Djokovic being in Australia, in Melbourne in particular, by being here, will excite anti-vax sentiment. That's the point. Radically different approach. Now, on the only other matter I wanted to mention, Your Honour, is just to be clear about the detention point. Yes, we are seeking by way of FANA relief an order from immigration detention. No, and I agree with Mr. Lloyd, I can't tentatively ask Your Honour to order that Mr. Djokovic be released into the community pending the determination of the case. I accept that the Minister has purported to cancel his visa, and an officer could therefore reasonably suspect that he's an unlawful non-citizen and thereby detain him under 189. Of course, we say the decision's affected by jurisdictional error, but don't say that undermines the capacity of an officer to reasonably suspect that he's unlawful and therefore detain him. The point, however, is that immigration detention in the Act is a flexible concept, as Mr. Lloyd knows, and indeed, when Mr. Djokovic attended my solicitor's offices at the hearing on Monday, he was, despite being here rather than in the Park Hotel, in immigration detention. He was in immigration detention because there were ADF officers in the building ensuring that he didn't leave the building. Now, all that we say about detention on an interim basis is that we understand, point one, that the Minister does not propose to detain Mr. Djokovic tonight. So the first, and by detain I mean take into held custody. It's contemplated clearly that happened at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, and indeed Mr. Lloyd referred to a particular location in the CBD. The point I wish to make is that, particularly in circumstances where Mr. Lloyd acknowledges and is referring to Section 256 of the Migration Act, the right of Mr. Djokovic for access to his lawyers. And point two, if it's the case that this court or the federal court will hear this matter on Sunday, as both parties, I think, now contemplate.
More accurately, hope.
And in light of the significant practical difficulties that we encountered while Mr. Djokovic was at the Park Hotel and getting instructions from him previously, we do think it would be appropriate for the court to make an order that not only ensures that Mr. Djokovic can be detained with us during the hearing on Sunday, if that's when it occurs, but that indeed, given that there will be 1 day preparing for that hearing being tomorrow, that Mr. Djokovic could also be detained with his lawyers tomorrow, rather than going through the somewhat pointless process of being detained with a potential media circus at 8 a.m, taken to some unknown location, only then to be brought back within 24 hours, potentially for another hearing. It all seems rather more kerfuffle than is necessary or appropriate, particularly when the Minister doesn't propose to detain Mr. Djokovic tonight. So there seems to have been some accommodation by the Minister. We're not quite sure why that wouldn't extend to sensible accommodation tomorrow. Sunday. And into Sunday, obviously. So tomorrow during the day at specified location where the lawyers will be. Tomorrow night, we see no reason why that wouldn't be the same regime as tonight. Sunday, with his lawyers at the hearing.
Opposed, Mr. Lloyd.
So this hearing is going out live at the moment, which I'm restreaming from. And we're facing challenges just like... Go ahead, Stu. We'll pick up.
So he's basically being done, from what I gathered just there, that he said that, okay, we're going to assume that everything was right, that he couldn't have done anything more to justify his being here, right? He'd done everything right, except he's going to incite anti-vax movements down in Melbourne, right? So if I'm listening to that correctly, I didn't listen to it all, obviously, it's only that snippet, but I didn't hear them say anything about he's tested positive overseas, he's running around going to basketball games, he's lied on his document, and he was like 2 days, 12 days ago he was in Spain when he said he had to have been isolating, right? They said that he's going to incite anti-vax movements within Victoria, within Melbourne. Right? That is a thought crime. He's been done for a crime he has not committed.
Stefan Molyneux had his visa, and other commentators have been faced with, and Lauren Southern as well. And that is ethnic tension. Was one of the visas being reviewed for there. So it's not the first time that a visa has been cancelled for that. And if we go back to the 1950s, many a visa was cancelled and many a person deported during our Red Scare. So this is a thought crime case, but again, it's not the first time.
No.
Two members of the Australian Border Force being present on the same floor where he is providing instructions for the purposes of a hearing on the Sunday. And thirdly, back into detention on Saturday night. And finally, in detention at the offices of his solicitors during the course of the hearing, if that was possible.
Yes, although I perhaps indicate that the current instructions I have is that he'd be taken to his solicitor's office to assist them to prepare their submissions up until midday, and then he'd be taken back into detention thereafter and for Saturday night. And then brought back to his solicitor's offices on the Sunday morning for the hearing, assuming there is to be a hearing on Sunday.
Well, the position that obtains, as I've understood it, Mr. Lloyd, is that Mr. Wood cannot, to adopt his expression, tenably contend that I can do much else about this. It's really the concessions that are being made have been made, and other than that, the Act applies.
Well, I understand what my friend has asked for. I think we've come a long way to give him what he wants, but unless there's some other proposal, I mean, that's what my client is prepared to agree to.
Well, it is not in any sense intended to be any sort of criticism of the respondent. The fact of the matter is that the Act contains the provisions it does, and it imposes affirmative obligations once a cancellation decision has been effected. I don't need to say anything more to the parties present about what the Act requires to happen. So you would say, as you have said more than once now, my client has made a number of concessions. It may not be exactly what the applicant wants, but it's a lot more than might otherwise have been proffered. The court will adjourn briefly.
The Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia.
So, to me, it sounds like he's going to be detained ASAP, because he currently is kicking around the country with a cancelled visa, and therefore any police officer that sees him has the right to arrest him because he doesn't have a visa. So the Act must stipulate that he has to be detained. Therefore, there's nothing that the judge can do about it.
The concern from what I believe the defence team as well, was that him being detained pending deportation, then being released pending circuit court hearing, seemed absurd. The defence team was fairly asking for the opportunity that if you're going to detain him to a place where he can come to the hearing, or don't detain him at all, because with such a profile as he has, flight risk is unlikely. If you're going to leave, the Border Force will be aware of it. He's not going underground. There's no need for such a detainment. And it's one day. Alarm, is there a concern? Has the minister brought forward a concern, or is the minister bringing forward a concern that he may bring about anti-vaccine unrest? That would be something very different, wouldn't it? If it is, That's a change, isn't it?
Well, you know, again, thought crime. Are we going to look at people's social media accounts or is it only high profile people? What about high profile politicians that want to come over here or whatever that don't agree with the orthodoxy? Right? This is a dangerous precedent to set, this sort of thing. It just concerns me. It just, you know, I just think, what kind of world are we living in where you cannot have a dissenting view? You must go with the government's narrative or you will be literally detained at the border, thrown out of the country.
Is an anti-vaccine sentiment. So now, and this is the assertion by the defense team, is that this is not about attending venues COVID positive. This isn't about all kinds of what we've been talking about for the past 40 minutes. This is, yeah, this is Alex Hawke's decision is based on, the defense team is saying that the Alex Hawke's decision is a decision that he may incite anti-vaccine unrest. That.
But 94% of Victoria is vaccinated, right? There's not that last 6% are sitting on the fence, but Djokovic is here, so I'm not going to get vaccinated. Do they really think that this circus that they've created around this issue is going to do anything but bolster the opinions of people who aren't vaccinated? Like, it just confirms everything that these people are talking about, right? This is a cult movement. You must comply. There is censorship. This is it. It's playing out in front of us, and it is what we were talking about before. It's exactly what I was saying to you earlier, that they were headhunting him because he was not vaccinated. And they were going to get him hell or high water. Right? Maybe those other issues come into it down the track. But, you know, they're the issues I would have picked. Lying, went to a basketball game. It doesn't even sound like they come into it because, I'll tell you, because he hasn't been prosecuted in those countries. So there is no proof, even if he's admitted it, there's been no prosecution. He hasn't committed an official crime.
At the same time, we may be at 94, 95, 96% vaccination rates, or ACT, which is at 101% vaccination rate. But boosters, that may be as low in some areas as 20, 25% so far. So the discussions, the reasoning, the arguments reset again. We're back to 25% again. We've got to, and this same discussion is going to ignite anew. No longer is it Australia vaccinated 95%, Australia is only 20% vaccinated. And Alex Hawke make the claim that to get back, not back to, but to get to fully vaccinated, well, this is now fully vaccinated. Stick with me. Fully vaccination, which is now third, or keep everyone, as we're evolving to in language of vaccine, up-to-date vaccination, which is, it seems we're going with fourth, fifth, and onwards. That he risks that having a star tennis player come to the country incites that concern that others will look up to him as someone to imitate. That, oh, look, you know, I'm a fit tennis player and I'm totally fit in this very lots of COVID place. And look at me, be like me, rather than a example of, I've got my fourth jab. Novak is, I've had no jabs. And that may be enough, according to the defense lawyer.
Maybe, but you're looking at that how long is this going to go on for, right? Because if it continues to go the way that it's going, and this gets milder and milder and milder, they continue to push, you know, restrictions and no singing and dancing in events, and like you had like a rapper come out and was having a go at the people from Hillsong Church, right? Because they had a concert. It's like, weren't rappers like, when I was a kid, man, rappers were like, if you lived long enough to leave school, right, in the hood, you were a rapper, right? You got shot at, you got stabbed, you got like, it was all your mates were dead, right? You were a pretty tough dude if you're going to call yourself a rapper, right? In the late 90s, early 2000s. Now you got rappers insulting Hillsong Church, right? That these people are being unsafe. I just think, what kind of world are we living in now? I don't understand it. Like, I really don't. I don't get it. There's nothing. Look, Tesla doesn't need to advertise. Tesla spends $0 on advertising. I don't need to tell you, Chris, how good a Apple iPhone is. You know, right?
Right.
You should not need to advertise this vaccine. But they do, because people are getting sick that are vaccinated. That is not Djokovic's fault. That is just the reality of the situation, right? So it's because he is that symbol. He is showing to people he is the emperor with no clothes moment. He's the guy that's standing there going, it's okay to have a different opinion.
Opinions, as we've learnt, can be dangerous. Whether the right will point to critical race theory as a dangerous idea, or the left will point to anti-vaccine sentiment as a dangerous idea. These ideas are flagged by many sides of politics, whether it's left, right, or whatever, as dangerous and not to be taught. In the US, they're having revolts and flips over. Lyle Shelton and Mark Latham stand against safe schools and teaching transgender theory and questioning gender dysphoria to children. Thought crimes are nothing new. It's how we prosecute them that changes. On the one side, the right, whether it's Republican or Latham, is concerned about it being taught as part of a curriculum. On the other side, it's seeking for something to be taught as a curriculum. In this case, we have someone who is not a teacher, but is an example of, like a school, a man with enormous reach. Like Lawrence Southern has enormous reach, so does Novak Djokovic, as he's been called. Isn't there something here that rhymes like the concern of the critical race theory revolt in the US or the safe schools here in New South Wales, that Novak is running, stick with the analogy, a pseudo Instagram school, that he really is not just one man with an idea, but by advertising what he is, he creates something more. He's running a mini, because of his influence, good or bad, he's going to be treated differently. And that's the minister's concern, that he's running a no-vax school on, I'm fit and healthy, I don't need to be vaccinated.
And he is. Like, he literally is. He's got over COVID in what appears to be like a couple of weeks, and like, he's had to play one of the toughest tennis tournaments in the world, right? He should be a beacon to hold up to. This is what happens when you're physically fit, and you look after yourself, you look after your body, and you watch what you eat. You can kick this virus like that, right? It's you know. Instead, he's being crucified. But you got to remember with this stuff too, Chris, there's a lot of stuff that we think at the time is a great idea, and it turns out to be terrible, right? Look at cane toads, right? Some idiot bought them in. Sounded like a good idea. Wasn't a good idea. The war in Iraq, right? The war in Afghanistan, right? There was hardly any Americans running around at the time when those planes flew into those buildings that weren't like, get the people that did this, right? Destroy the whole country. Wiped out a generation of young men over there, right? One's man terrorist, another man's freedom fighter. Now there are no terrorists there, and we should find them and we should kill them. But what I'm saying is we waged a whole war against a whole country that now turns out to be horrible. What was a horrible mistake, basically. Look at Iraq. We destroyed Iraq, destroyed Saddam Hussein, and we ended up with ISIS, right? And then we ended up with like ISIS plus or whatever the hell that was getting around for a while. The people would get beheaded, you know, in the streets.
Yeah. This
is just ludicrous. And so now you can look back in hindsight and go, well, you know, that wasn't such a great idea. I mean, is this going to be like that? Are we going to look back through the lens of history and everyone changes their stance and goes, oh, yeah, no, it was with the vaccines when they first come out, but yeah, no, later on I realised, no, this has gone too far, you know. That's a similar thing. Can have a similar regret later on in life when you look back, when you're not scared that there's terrorists hiding around every single corner, you know. At the time you're calling for blood, you think you're in the right, you think that, yeah, this is what we need to do, and you're anti-American, you're anti-Australian if you don't do this. Turns out the majority were totally incorrect.
At the same time, it's not up to an individual influencer or an individual person to decide what government policy would be or what school policy would be. And Novak has as much influence over public policy as an individual educator in a schoolroom, because an individual educator educates 30 people on how to educates 30 people, 30 school children. Novak, in this case, has influenced millions, 9 million followers on Twitter, 15 million on Instagram, and how many? Probably 1 million Australians. Right now, tonight, probably 20 million Australians are talking about this issue. So he's running a school class within it.
Where does it stop, but Chris? Because if you get a radical right wing or radical left wing political party, once this precedent gets set, right? Imagine your local communist branch gets in, right? Your local good old fashioned commies get in, and they turn around and they do exactly what's just happened. No travel to the outside. Outside media is deemed dangerous, so we have to restrict your view of stuff that's on the internet, and now going to restrict the people that come into the country and the information and ideas that you are allowed to see, right? And can't say, oh, there's no way that could happen. It's happening right now in countries like China, right? It happens in a lot of countries, Iran. There's heaps of them that do exactly what I'm saying now. They limit your access to the internet. They limit the books that you can read, and they only allow certain people into the country. We are becoming the thing that we hate. We have looked into the abyss, and the abyss has looked into us.
The Raheem Kassam already had that occur with Christina Keneally, who called for, and he working for Breitbart News, and now he's with his National Review. He launched his own Daily Wire. He launched his own since then. Shock jock, gonzo journalist, criticizes journalism what you will. He writes articles and does it every day. Call him an activist or journalist, whatever you like. It's hard to know, but he's a journalist. He writes stuff online. Call it biased. So is most everything these days. We will probably end up with more like that. And rather than, we're already there. It's already happened. And we're just looking at another one of it. So we have become that. One of the points that I remember listening to someone talk about Soviet Union post-Afghanistan was that losing that conflict as they did, or withdrawing from it, they brought back with them, the veterans from that conflict, the melancholy of the loss of confidence and hope. And that rather like the people that they found in Afghanistan who were suffering so much, they brought back with them a disease bigger than what Afghanistan was suffering before. And that depression, that collapse was what the Afghani veterans spoke of when they got back to Russia more than anything else, and that they became the country that they hoped to invade. And really, that's one of the biggest things that a lot of people seem to be speaking about, that this virus that did come from China to begin with, as divisive as it seems to say, but it did come from China to begin with, we ended up becoming more like the country that seems to have successfully eradicated it than anything else. We've adopted many of their views and values, and we now turn to them that seem to be succeeding where we seem to be unable to. And we turn around and go, well, we've forgotten all about where it came from, and we're just trying to deal with ourselves and looking for more challenges within us on how to deal with it more than anything else. And I find that the most interesting part of all. Hopefully that they did actually adjourn the hearing about 15 minutes ago, and that's an unusual time that has been adjourned for such a hearing like it. So we might not hear more on it tonight.
Mm.
In terms of his dispute,
Thing what you said, Chris, about that we have become more like since we've been infected with the China virus, and it's funny. I had some things that I put up a while ago that said that communism is the real virus, right? And it's kind of ironic that you make that comment that we have become more like the communists to fight this virus, but it just seems to me that it is so disproportionate to the threat. It is not the Black Death. It is not the Spanish flu. It is a bad flu now. It is not Delta. It is not Alpha. It's not Beta. It's the time to take your foot off everybody's neck is now. Relinquish the ring of power. Throw the ring into the volcano, Frodo. Get rid of it. It's cursed, son.
And that has been what's been happening over the past few days, that from the CDC director bringing up what used to be a talking point for people that oppose them, saying that 75% of their deaths, of the COVID US deaths, had 4 or more comorbidities. When CDC Director Rochelle Walensky is starting to say that the political journey is changing, just as I'm sure you've heard in the same interview before, I believe it was a congressional hearing, Walensky mentioning that it was about dying with COVID versus dying of COVID. And yesterday, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to reiterate. Sorry, there's a little bit of a lag in our audio. Yeah, the dying with rather than dying of. And I noticed that when Gladys Berejiklian changed the language, one of the journalists said, "Oh, we noticed you changed the language." And she said, "Yes, because it can take up to 6 weeks to get a cause of death. Some of these people are extremely old. They have many comorbidities. So it is inaccurate to say died of COVID. We need to say died with COVID until we have further information down the track." But these deaths never seem to be revised. They just remain as the numbers. And obviously, more infections, more people are going to be infected, more people are going to die with COVID because more people are sick. They don't necessarily die of COVID, if that makes sense.
I think to air this next clip does actually break both Facebook and YouTube's terms of service, but I'm going to air it anyway because it's the Pfizer CEO that says it. I've read the terms of service. I don't think we can actually say what we're about to, but I'll put it up anyway. If we can just join with this one. It was a turning point when this came out, and it surprised me as well. Give us just 1 second, we can.
Two, one.
That the 2 doses of the vaccine offer very limited protection, if any. The 3 doses with a booster, they offer reasonable protection against hospitalization and deaths. Against deaths, I think very good. And less protection against infection. Now, we are working on a new version of our vaccine, the 1.1, let me put it that way, that will cover Omicron as well. And of course, we are waiting to have the final results.
So, Pfizer CEO Dula came out with that one, and it surprised me. It surprised a lot of people when that was said. Very limited protection, if any, against Omicron, which explains 100,000 cases a day, hopefully.
Yeah, because this is COVID forever. It is terrorism 2.0, right? There's terrorists hiding under your bed everywhere, you know, and wage war and spend tens of billions, hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars fighting this invisible enemy. And all of a sudden, it will just not be a thing anymore, right? And you'll be expected to just forget that all of that transpired, exactly like you did with the war against terrorism. I'm not saying you personally, but exactly like the public did with this war against terrorism. It was almost like this switch got flicked, and all of a sudden, there's no more terrorism. Like, are the terrorists not going out because of COVID? I don't get it, right? I don't understand. It's like, this is the only issue that is happening in the world right now. And there are some serious, serious problems coming down the barrel economically from the decisions that we've made. We're starting to see it now. People are starting to wake up a little bit and go, hang on a second, there's no food here. I can't get a car if I order it for like 6 months. I'm paying hand over fist for things used to be quite cheap. What's going on? My house price is going up 20%, or I can't afford a house. I'm back living with my mum. 20 people lying to rent a house. Like, this stuff starts to come into the cycle. What the hell is going on? They don't realise it's a consequence of the lockdown.
There is a dangerous virus about, and it does make people sick. I guess the challenge is, what is the right amount of measure to it? And if this does rhyme true with terrorism, this becomes less about the issue itself and more about most of our society able to respond to external threats. But was it terrorism? Because at the same time, this kind of mass hysteria, this is not the first time we've faced it. Need we go back that far to face the threat of, for example, global thermonuclear war? We don't need to stray far to look at the Red Terror of the 1950s, where we had not just a vote of parliament to ban a political party, literal thought crime, but then held a referendum on it when the High Court said, yeah, you can't just unperson people because of what they think. No. So Menzies had to go to a referendum where most of the states said, yeah, we don't want to unperson people just because they're communists. That's not, they're Australians too, and we'll deal with that. To which Menzies got rather upset and then didn't do anything more about it and just let all of the police and everything else go. But we've had these hysterias before. Japanese during World War II. We did the same as the Americans, rounded up everyone who was Japanese, and rightly or wrongly, that's part of war. Go back to the First World War, what we did with the Germans. And 1 in 4 20 to 34-year-old males volunteered for military service in Europe. These numbers are 1 in 10 of them then died, Australians. So we're now back to 1914, over 100 years ago, and we're facing the same kind of problem and overreaction. I'm going to assert this is not going to go away, that we're always going to face a problem and then overreact to it and then hopefully try and deal with it normally. Because after we had the communists, we kind of learnt to live with communists and go, maybe a little bit of that socialism is okay, maybe just this much, but not the whole communism. You never go full communist. So right,
But
this isn't
the communist narrative fell apart, right? You have to remember that it disintegrated. You had a lot of great authors that there was the Gulag Archipelago, which they do say was the final nail in the coffin. Once Solzhenitsyn escaped and wrote that book, and everybody in the Western countries got to actually read what was happening inside of Russia, and you had these leftist intellectuals could no longer say that it was just being made up. It was some bullshit story that was being made up by the far right. It disintegrated, right? Because we shone some light on it. But we do overreact to things. And then sometimes, although we underreact to things, like they did with Hitler initially when he was building up his military, they left it until he, until he had a force that could be reckoned with. But the mother of all issues that we're going to be dealing with next is climate change. That is the mother of all social controls that is going to be somehow integrated with the controls that are being done under the pandemic, that is going to be integrated with this new world digital currency, or these government-backed central bank digital currencies that are on their way in at full speed. And this whole system is going to mesh it together, and you will be tracked, traced, vaccinated, carbon credits everywhere you go for everything that you do. And this is what's coming down the barrel. And unless people stop saying, oh, you've got a tinfoil hat on, and actually look at what's going on, this is the future. Right? This is what I'm hoping to push back against. This is not a good future, right? It's not no more. There's no more. There'll be no more farming of animals, right? It'll be all lab bred meat. You'll be driving electric vehicles around everywhere. They're all hooked up to the grid. You'll be, and you might say, oh, that's not a bad thing. Well, people don't want to drive electric vehicles around, otherwise they already would be. So your freedom is going to be taken away, is more what I'm getting at. The freedom of choice, the freedom to not be vaccinated, make decisions for yourself. That's all going to be removed.
At the same time, we've been, ever since the end of kind of frontier farming, and we didn't farm our own food, we've been dependent on others for that. Very few of us plant more than a few herbs to try and get by. We're entirely dependent on someone else to try and do that. If we do see a reduction in the consumption of meat, is that necessarily a bad thing? Maybe that's a transition. We're growing into a world that is, we're a long way from Novak on this one, but we'll keep going. We're in a world that is about to hit 9 billion people. We grew up in a world that was just barely 4 billion people. There's only so much to go around. We've cut the amount of arable land per person. We've got a third of what we've got, probably not even a third, a quarter or a fifth of what our parents were born into. And what are you going to do with that fifth of an acre that we probably have per person, or it was an acre, now it's a fifth of an acre? What are you going to do to get your most out of it? And meat's just hard. And that market reality of you've only got a fifth of an acre to grow will be skewed and manipulated by different people who want more than other people. And World Economic Forum will do their best to get there. But we are so far from Novak here. We've got a hearing that's adjourned, and we've been going for an hour and a half. And this is been a long, wide-ranging conversation. Ghost, you give us the last word.
Right. Last word is keep your eye on this stuff, guys, and fight for freedom. Fight for freedom everywhere you see it. There is a war going on at the moment. There is an information war going on. There is a control war going on. I mean, you can see it. I mean, I read a thing today about how it's funny I worded it, 80 independent fact checkers all wrote a combined letter to YouTube, right, saying that they are not doing enough to combat fake news, right? So if they're independent, how the hell did they all get together and write the same letter and sign on to the same letter to YouTube to combat this stuff? So that's what I'm saying. There it is, an open letter, YouTube CEO from the world's fact checkers. And you got to remember, there was just a court case that happened. Facebook turned around and said, yes, no, these are not legitimate, like actual fact checkers. They are opinions, right? These are opinion pieces. People need to remember this stuff when they're reading it. They are opinion. They might be well-knowledged opinions, but they are still opinions, right? And there's a war for your mind. There's a war for your body. There's a war for your soul. And there is a war for them putting medications in your body that you may not want, right? So it's exhausting, right? But it is ongoing. And this war must be fought for the good of our children. Your last words, Chris?
Who is the International Fact-Checking Network? Run by Pointer. Who is Pointer? It's an institute.
Oh,
A rich guy, I would assume a rich guy in the 70s, rather like The Guardian, dumped $1 billion and said, go and do something with it.
yeah, George
it
Soros.
seems to be one that he became, and it became into something more and bigger. But who runs there? And something I'll say about this point is there incorrect information on the internet? Do you think that's wrong? Yeah, right. So there's incorrect information on the internet. The next question we then get to, what do you do about it? Let me just check if the hearing's come back. No, the hearing's not back. What do you do about incorrect information on the internet? So what would you do if there's incorrect information on the internet that says that Pauline Hanson pulled her pants down? There's something mild. Start there.
It's not relevant, right? Whoever wrote that, there's law in each country for defamation and whatever that will deal with that. It's sort of, this is the thing. Like, well, people are writing books that aren't. We don't agree with the books that are being written because some of them have incorrect information. So we should control printing press, us who are in power. And then you get voted out and someone else comes into power and you end up with this. It's like the political war, the religious wars, right? This is why we separated church and state. We got rid of it because churches were always fighting for that ring of power, for the government, for the state, so they could control the populace. This is the new religion, right? The internet is the new religion of power, right? And we are in a war for.
Let me go to the other extreme. Rather than Pauline pants down, let me go to the other extreme, which is someone is selling bogus cures on the internet. There's something a bit more real. You've got someone saying that they've got a cure.
Pfizer, Moderna, and
no, I'm saying that there is someone who is selling a fake cure for COVID or for cancer and making money off it. What do you do there? How do you?
Unfortunately, when you have freedom, you have risk, right? And you cannot have freedom without risk. And how do you control what's on there? How do you know that Pfizer and Moderna and that haven't made these cocktails of drugs and given them to people and been fined $1 billion?
Yeah, true, but talking too much about Pfizer. We can't on that one because
I'm talking about the vaccine.
Talking about cancer.
I'm talking about their previous crimes that they have been fined for, right? Their previous cocktails of drugs that they've put up, that these guys have put up. Johnson & Johnson, like the whole array of them have copped it over this stuff. You know? That is misleading information, you know? So how do you control this? It's the Wild West. Who is the dictator?
Acting against, well, what the answer is, Pointer wants action against repeat offenders and content that is constantly flagged as disinformation and misinformation and stopping people from being able to make money from it. It's hard because what you think is disinformation, what I think is disinformation is different, and that will differ for everyone. But there needs to be some guidelines. And this comes back to the question of should there be a license for speech? And maybe there should be. There's a license to drive, there's a license for guns, and we've got a new technology. We've got a new technology, like driving a car. Maybe there should be a license on how to use it. You need a license to ride a horse over certain speeds. Why shouldn't you need a license to use a printing press that can reach millions in the click of a button? We had a license for broadcast TV, and that was a limitation on freedom of speech. Why wouldn't I need a license to broadcast on Facebook to more than 500 people in a week? Because at that point, this tool, this microphone becomes such a powerful weapon to influence people that there are certain responsibilities, power and responsibilities, right? Certain power, you get accrue power, you've got a certain responsibility.
But that's the beauty of free speech, Chris, is that you get to air your ideas, and the bad ideas generally get turfed out when they get debated, when they get suppressed. I mean, you get shitty ideas like communism. I mean, have a look at that for a bad idea. Come through and wiped out 100 million people. I mean, same as Nazis. Nazis come through and, you know, there was a war that killed 55 million people. I mean, these things happen, but they're a necessity to having free speech. You have to have the ability to say what you're thinking, right?
Something I'll bring up is one of the largest, call it communist, call it socialist, but left-wing streamers, Hasanabi, ended up making just over 2 million a year on Twitch. He spends more than half of his day socialist theory. He's a broad and very popular left-winger who sits on stream and talks about it. I'll just say he's spreading communist ideas, which to a degree he is. Shouldn't he need a responsibility before he can go and earn that kind of revenue?
No, because I mean, to me, he's like the equivalent of a Holocaust denier, right? And he should be allowed to voice that idea. But is he being challenged? Is he doing debates? Is he talking to people about you know, his terrible ideas and the consequences and you know, the repercussions of what he's done? I mean, I think that these people should be able to speak about whatever it is that they want. You know, how are we going to have human progress if we can't say that the world is round, if we can't say that the earth revolves around the sun? I mean, these were all ideas that were punishable by death, right? People did die because they said these things, you know, and they turned out to be right.
The very same fear of COVID, for example, and many people hold an irrational fear of COVID, happened through social contagion, right? Many people are afraid of COVID, but many people are irrationally afraid of it. That spread because of not just mainstream media, but all kinds of media organizations that love the clicks. It's just how it works. And there was no responsibility to do that. And media does this. We're back to that fear mongering. Shouldn't there be some kind of? Can I? I'll just unmute.
The orders of the court are as follows. Upon the applicant, through his counsel, undertaking, 1, to file and serve as soon as is reasonably practicable, (a), an originating application respecting the interlocutory and final relief to be sought in this proceeding, (b), an affidavit to which is exhibited a copy of the respondent's statement of reasons for the decision made, purportedly pursuant to section 133C3 of the Migration Act 1958 (CTH), together with the submission for decision by the respondent. 2, to submit to such order, if any, as the court may consider to be just for the payment of compensation, to be assessed by the court, or as it may direct, to any person, whether or not that person is a party, affected by the operation of this order or undertaking, or any continuation, with or without variation, of the order or undertaking, and 3, to pay the compensation referred to in paragraph 2
Very
above,
twitchy.
the person affected by the operation of the order or undertaking, and upon the
A lot of people watching this. A lot of people.
respondent through his counsel undertaking that, 1, pending the final hearing and determination of this proceeding,
So there's going to be another.
or unless the applicant makes a written request of the respondent for his removal from Australia, he will not, whether by himself, his servants, his agents, the Department of Immigration, Citizenship, Migrant Services and Multicultural Affairs, the Australian Border Force, or howsoever otherwise take or...
Yeah, terrible, sirs.
That's Microsoft Teams. That's the Microsoft Teams spinning
to
loader.
take any step to remove or purport to remove the applicant
So 70
from Australia,
internet.
whether pursuant to section 1.
Yeah, it's a bit terrible, Chris.
8 or 199 of the Migration Act 1958 CTH .
Yeah, I can't really follow what's
By the
going on.
respondent to the officers of the applicant's solicitors, where he shall remain subject to the supervision of 2 officers of the Australian Border Force, the court orders and directs, 1, pursuant to sections 202-203 of the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia Act 2021 CTH the parties have leave to appear and to make submissions before the court by video and audio link. 2, the applicant have leave, now for then, to make oral application for judicial review of the decision of the respondent made purportedly pursuant to section 133C3 of the Migration Act 1958 CTH to cancel his temporary activity over subclass 408 visa. 3, subject to paragraph 4 of this order.
He's not being deported. He's being held until he can appeal this again, is what the judges have said.
Yeah.
Pursuant to section 1531 of the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia Act 2021 CTH .
From what I can gather, he gets to stay at his solicitors under border guard by 2 guards.
The proceeding be transferred to the Federal Circuit Court of Australia. 4, the parties and each of them forthwith do all things and take all steps as may be reasonably necessary to make application seeking confirmation of the transfer of the proceeding pursuant to section 32 AD1 of the Federal Court of Australia Act 1976 (CDH). Now, gentlemen, my understanding of the administrative arrangements of the courts is that it will be for the registry of this court to arrange transmission of this order, and that it will be then a matter for the Federal Court of Australia to deal with the parties. The final thing I wish to note, subject to anything the parties may wish to address in relation to the orders which have been pronounced, is that orders are pronounced in open court. A number of notations have been added to the order which deal with the narrative events which have occurred to this date and include some less significant matters, such as the respondent having not opposed the grant of leave and matters of that nature. So, subject to those matters, I propose to adjourn. Now, Mr. Wood, is there anything further you wish to add?
There you go. He's not going anywhere. No, wait, hold on.
I appreciate Your Honour has made orders. Can I raise one legitimate concern of my client about the 8 a.m. procedure tomorrow morning?
Of course.
Mr. Lloyd, during his submissions to the court, identified the address and location of that location where that would occur. We have a genuine concern about security and a potential media circus, to be frank, if the taking into detention of my client is to occur at the location that Mr. Lloyd has now identified. We don't understand how there could be any practical disadvantage for instead the taking of my
That is a totally fair concern. He is concerned not just about a circus, but his lawyers and Novak's officers, which were
into immigration detention to occur at a location to be agreed between the parties. But not one which has now been effectively announced to the world.
There are reasonable limits upon what these parties can expect of this court. I am concerned to hear and determine as efficiently as I can the issues in dispute in the proceeding. The one thing you can be guaranteed of is that I will not be a party to, and I will not be in any way somehow inveigled into the very real possibility of a media circus, if that is what the parties anticipate. One might have thought on mature reflection, Mr. Wood, and this is not directed at any of the council involved, that the obviousness of that have made by paragraphs 1 to 5. And the final part will be a series of notations which hopefully will make these orders more readily comprehensible by those persons in the public, both in Australia and internationally, able to recognise what has happened to this point.
Thank you, Your Honour. Well, that's I have no difficulty with that. The second thing was, when you read them out, I thought I heard you say that it was transferred to the Federal Circuit Court. Obviously, you mean the Federal Court. I just wanted to...
Well, if I said that, it certainly wasn't my intention. The order that I pronounced pursuant to section 1531 of the relevant act was that the proceeding be transferred to the Federal Court of Australia.
Thank you. And the third matter, which is really to pick up on Mr. Wood's matter, is about the arrangements for detention. I think there has been discussions between the parties. We are content if Order 2 is not pronounced and the detention arrangements can just be agreed between the parties. If Mr. Wood's side is happy with that, then that can be resolved. There seems to be...
I understand.
Oh, there's a lot of people watching.
And that's a very helpful submission. And to collapse those various...
Well, Chris, I think that's about it for the normal
undertakings respecting detention. I will simply...
I think that's about it, brother.
Simply add a notation that arrangements respecting the issue of detention from this moment until the hearing and determination of the proceeding, wherever that may be, has been the subject of agreement between the parties. Is that accurate?
It's not accurate, Your Honour. It's not accurate. There's been no agreement, is my instruction. The only thing that I'm requesting...
You can't ask me to broker this. I'm going to stand the matter down for another 5 minutes, and you can tell me distinctly what is or is not agreed. Otherwise, I will simply make orders. Adjourn the court.
Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia stands temporarily.
Not happy. Yep. Well, will be what it will be. So basically, from what I can gather from that mess, was that they're going to be taking him into detention tomorrow in the morning, because that's what the act says, but they don't want there to be a media circus. Both sides agree, and so they're going to try and choose somewhere to do that hasn't been decided yet, but the judge can't make orders on something that hasn't been decided yet. So, yeah, it'll be like Max somewhere, McDonald's car park, whatever. Novak will grab a coffee.
Station.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, I've got an early start, brother.
Thanks, Stuart. I'll keep an eye on the feed.
Thank you.
Keep it running here. Cross it over to Facebook. Thanks for your views. See you again.
Thank you, legend. All right, brother. I'm going to check out, and you and me will have a chat tomorrow. And
Time.
Thanks for.
See you, mate. Thanks, Stuart.
See you, mate.
Everyone else still with us. I'll keep it rolling. I've got to pull it down afterwards because this doesn't allow recording. So this is just the once. It's only going to be here once, and then that's it. SMH has a restream. A few of them do restreams at different times like this. So Stu had a good recap of what that was, which is, he's just going to be taken into custody at a agreed location. Nobody really wants that kind of media circus. If you're in Melbourne, though, I'm sure the paparazzi are prepped for that. If it's anything like Waukesha or where was Rittenhouse again, wherever he was, you follow the media followed the jury back to where they were going because they wanted to work out who the jury was. Spicy stuff there. everyone's watching this, and I know this isn't the most engaging at this moment, but it's if it is as defense says, and this is an attempt to prosecute political speech, that it might invite anti-vax sentiment. It puts the equation all back into play again. It all puts it back into question. Let me have a scroll back through some of the comments here. I don't have to go far to find this one. Yeah, speech licenses. That's what I'd like to talk about sometime. Really nice break off. I don't know how much I'm going to keep these up, but I thought this one that I needed to jump in and say something on, because if you're anything like me, you're up at 11 p.m. and you want to know what happens with this live. So why not hang out with me while we're doing it? I'm sure there's going to be more exciting streams of this. Yeah, that's a good point. We're not looking for unlimited freedom. If anything we've learnt from ideologies, it is an unlimited ideology leads to trouble. Unlimited communism leads to problems. At the same time, unlimited laissez-faire capitalism leads to problems. Anytime you pursue an ideology for ideology's sake, you end up with problems. And we want to try and minimize problems. There are no solutions, only trade-offs. And the best trade-offs we can sometimes find is too much communism, too much fascism, too much anything. It spoils the sauce for everyone. And ideologies are not answers. Ideologies are tools to help us understand the world and implement what would be better trade-offs that might solve some of what we have. And that unlimited levels of communication has just as many problems as limits to communication, but why not have a look at it? Let's have a, yeah, of course, love it. Yeah, jab me. I take my jab every day. I don't know. I can be a pro-vaxxer. I can be an anti-vaxxer. It's, if there's anything I've learned from the past year of almost 2 years of following protests, whatever issue I cover, I'm either an extreme pro or anti, whatever that cause might be. I've been called fascist, Nazi. Yeah, why not? Go for it. I've been called anti-vaxxer, pro-vaxxer. And this is where we come back to speech, is that to speak on a topic, I'll keep an eye on that in the background. To speak on a topic is to inherently platform that. And that's something that's coming out of the United States at the moment, is to ask people to stop platforming certain topics that they don't want. That comes with it its own question, like what much of the freedom movement in Sydney and Australia in general is trying to work out is who leads them, because it's been an inherently anti-authoritarian movement, and now it's finding that the people that are the leaders of it, they don't necessarily like, or some don't like, and they're trying to have a debate internally of who's leading us. And some may like Craig Kelly and some may not, and some may like Clive Palmer and some may not, and they may like the Liberal Democrats or the Informed Medical Options Party, or etc., or they may not. And now this group of people is now going through a journey to work out who is the leader of them. Just like countries have elections, except this movement is trying to work out who is filling this political vacuum. What some have found, and have been reaching out to me over the Christmas break, is that the people who have filled that political vacuum weren't always the most talented, weren't always the most honest, weren't always the best people that they necessarily liked. Many were. This isn't about them. This is about the people that they don't like. And there's always that debate, because the political vacuum that they fill is the same political vacuum that government fills. Just as the people that you vote for every year, you might find weren't necessarily the best qualified people for the job, but the most ambitious to get there. Whether it's the Prime Minister that we look at today with Scott Morrison, or whether it was Paul Keating and his wonderful way with words, he may not have been the most talented person for that job in 1983, and Scott Morrison may not be the most talented person for the job in 2022, but he wants it more, and he's willing to do what it takes to get there more. And what people tend to hate most about politics comes up in any political space. But if any movement, be it from Black Lives Matter to an anti-vaccine movement, is going to get to where it wants, it must get involved in that same political scene. In case you're wondering why you're sitting here watching me, just waiting for the hearing to come back so you get to hear my wonderful insight that I've been building up over the Christmas break. You're welcome. I'll come to more questions later on. This same political sphere, many people got involved with the freedom movement because they didn't want politics. They said, no, enough of all of that. It's time for something new, something fresh, something different. And they got that. But like ever, the same people who attended a protest group of 30 or 50 or even just a couple of hundred is now a protest movement involving tens or across Australia, hundreds of thousands. Who leads them? And these hundreds of thousands find the traditional political parties no longer fulfill the role that they want, but the same political who are in this role that political parties no longer traditionally suit needs political parties to represent it. And so we have an anti-authoritarian movements needing authoritarians, needing people to leave them. And we end up with exactly what much of the movement is facing at the moment. Who leads us? Who do we want? Where do we want to go? Who do we want to be? Who are we? It's really not that different. And everyone will be offended by this. You're welcome again. Too much of what the Black Lives Matters movement faced coming away from its successes of 2020. BLM didn't appear out of nowhere in 3 weeks through May and June last year. Sorry, year before last. It had been building for years. But then it had billions of dollars. Every Democrat wanted to give it support, and every corporation said, we're here for you. And when they got it all, just like many political movements that rise very quickly, they didn't know what to do with it. And they're still struggling to harness it into something more focused, because rather than becoming an independent political movement, every political party, a political party wanted to say, oh, you've got a sweet candy. Yes. That's a lovely candy you've got there. How about you hold the candy and just wave it around and help us lead all of everyone where we want to go? Nobody likes seeing the sausage get made. It's Otto von Bismarck's words, not mine. And for that, we need to go back to the 1880s, 1890s. Politics is hard and messy. And a lot of people have come to the BLM and freedom movement hoping for an alternative to the traditional. Be it BLM's had enough of the white fellas who have for years been saying, vote for me and we'll help you out. But things look about the same as they did in the 1970s. To the other side, where the freedom movement has been looking for libertarians and an dissent movement. This is hard. It's an evolution that most movements need to go through. What it'll look like on the other side. I will say this. As simple as just getting or not getting the jab. Pro anti-social distancing. Yes. I'll be that. Sure, why not? Yep, tyranny. Love tyranny. 100%. I eat it every day. And boys are being pro-vax. No, I love it. No, I love the vax. I love them all. Especially I have it on breakfast cereal or something. I don't know. Pro-anti-vax. I try and fill a niche that can't be filled by most of the other commentators, that it's not that simple. Sorry, man. Guys, it's not that simple. It's not a good or bad red or blue team. As true as it is, and we all need to be. I just can't fit into that kind of binary and tell you, yep, orange man bad, because he's not. And I can't just tell you that all vaccines good or bad, because it's not. It's not that simple. Often with most of these stories, both sides have some truth to it. And much of the debates that most of the pro and anti-vaccine campaigners have to say is that both are true. Is that the vaccine has its pros and cons, because there is no perfect vaccine or perfect dividing the virus. Many people will say, oh, just take vitamin D and you'll be fine from COVID stuff. Yeah, it's not that simple. Not many things are, but in an increasingly busy, over information bombarded world, we're looking for the simplest possible answer. The dog was not injected for. I gotta stop clicking on Rolf's Pullman's. I'm gonna click on someone. But you can never have too much rationality. Rationality tends to impede action of any kind. Rationality doesn't get things done. Rationality doesn't, as a rule, change the world. I have never seen someone so overwhelmed. I have never seen someone so overwhelmed with rationality that they got out of their chairs and into the streets in a protest. Protests are not rational. They're not reasonable. They're not profitable. Rationality rarely drives social change. Passion does. It's the reason why tonight Romeo Georges is likely hosting a live stream as well, but we'll have thousands of people listening to what he has to say. Thousands. Both he and I are probably similarly qualified in a way, although my bouquet is much nicer. Just pat the bouquet. Oh, yes, very nice. Bouquet means a blurry background, is much nicer, but we're similarly qualified in what we're saying, in that neither of us are medical professionals, we're not political professionals, we're not particularly skilled at what we're doing, but my delivery is going to be different. The reason why thousands of people listen to him, and he has such a huge social media following, it's not just that he streams more regularly, because he doesn't. He takes long breaks and he shuts down his accounts and starts up new one. It's his pure oratorial charisma and passion, and that's the same for many political leaders. We're not looking for rational, reasonable leaders. Otherwise, Trump wouldn't have been elected, or Biden, for that matter. We oftentimes are looking for the most passionate, partially because it fills a bit of a gap in our lives, but otherwise because for many people, rationality is not the path they've seen to be through around them's greatest success. Except for when you do have too much rationality. And then we can end up with some problems. Can I talk about Pfizer? I'm not talking about Pfizer. Nope, I can't talk about Pfizer. Application of rules, judicial considerations. So you can tell people what to do. We're not here to argue about the vaccine as much as this is about the vaccine. One way to follow a narrative. I love how the judge says he's going to delay for 5 minutes and we've got a 15-minute break, which I'm trying to fill with fine, nuanced rationality, but is in fact really just the commentary of a man who's been to too many protests. Or not enough. Maybe it's one of those horseshoes coming up on 11:10 p.m. Where's media code of conduct? Oh, way beyond that. If anyone can broadcast on, well, hold on a minute. Media code of conduct. Now, I had an interaction with a meeting when it came to code of conduct. Daily Mail, anti-vaxxer. The top YouTube result for job result for a Daily Mail anti-vaxxer. While there, as much as I don't like to use the term journalist.
The Minister for Immigration, Citizenship, Migrant Services and Multicultural Affairs for hearing.
Yes, Mr. Wood.
Your Honour, I think I can say that it's agreed between the parties, if Your Honour is willing, to amend the order where Your Honour's order refers to an address in Lonsdale Street. Simply add the words after it or any other location agreed between the parties.
You agree with that, Mr. Lloyd?
That will be fine. Thank you. Thank you. We do. Is Your Honour hearing me?
I can hear you very clearly. Thank you. I express to the parties and their counsel the court's gratitude to the significant efforts which have been demonstrated by them this evening in seeking to advance the progress of the matter, at least to the extent that that has been achieved. I will publish extempore reasons tomorrow morning, which explain how we have arrived at the orders which have been made. Adjourn the court.
The Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia stands adjourned.
Cool. What a party, guys. We made it to the end. All right. He will be handed off to be detained at any such agreed location between the Commonwealth and the lawyers. So I guess there's no suppression order on this. So the paparazzi can really just chase them all over town. All right, guys. Thank you for joining me on that watch party. I was going to be up with it anyway, so it was lovely to join with the rest of your night. Go to bed. Novak's going to jail. We'll see more of a circus on all the hearings tomorrow. Night, guys.